when you guys are done, it's recording. Nice.
Oh, lighting's actually pretty bad. If you can see the camera here, like, it's very dark. No, it's better now, it's better now. Madam Chair, under side opening government, we would like to raise gay awareness and inclusiveness in our society. But the point in which we meet an issue or there is a problem in which in which the life of a child is concerned and his future is concerned, we think that the state has a greater duty to ensure that these children are protected in the first place. We think that sexual orientation is itself could come from nature or nurture, but we think that the technology that we're talking about under this particular debate is one in which can perfectly detect what a person would identify in the future as a gay or as a heterosexual people. We think, ultimately speaking, the kinds of children that are, or the kinds of parents that will be willing to let these children out, Madam Speaker, are the ones who don't necessarily like these children to begin with. That they don't feel that they are capable of being honest and responsible parents, and in fact, some of them may hate these children. So there are people who would probably want to throw these children out when they grow up in a moment, sir. At the same time, or try to get them turned straight. At the same time, we think that the kind of mechanism that the state will engage with in this particular debate is one in which will compensate these parents for these children if they want to do so. Note ultimately that parents still have a choice between keeping the child or giving it up for adoption. But we put to you that where the child is given up for adoption, they will be compensated at an equitable or at a flat rate that will not discriminate between, let's say, females or males. Under that kind of model, it's very much akin to the way state compensates for land under that kind of principle. Given that I've set up this particular debate, what am I going to talk about? How this firstly leads to a better life for the child, and secondly, how this maximizes social welfare. Before that, closing.
If love is the greatest quantifier to a good child, won't you now be manipulating parents and could have given that child the best life because you're taking away by good money?
So here's the thing about context, right? At the point which a parent is willing to give up his child for a set sum of money, we don't think that kind of love ever crystallized in the first place. But we think, ultimately speaking, that the state owes duty to care for the child, not just the parent itself. It's the reason why states have social services to ensure that parents don't abuse their child. It's the reason why states do step in certain instances to give children education where parents may not be the best actors to do so. What we put to you under this kind of under this debate is that you eliminate the direct probability of an awful future of this homosexual child at the point in which you realize that, or the parents realize that they are bigoted. Because ultimately speaking, if you do recognize that these parents are willing to give up the child, it means that there are also the kinds of people who are likely to abuse them for their sexuality or send them to missionary or religious schools to convert them, giving them and oppressing these particular children. At the point which you are no longer able to directly reach out to these children after they're born, it means that it's harder for you to get your social services or your welfare services kicking in under that particular model. But more than that, in the moment, we think that the outcome of potential acceptance under that kind of model hurts the child. Accepting on some instance the premise that parents may come to terms to love their children in the end, homosexual or not. We put to you that in the best case, this comes at a huge cost, right? That the child has to undergo the abuses of the parents, undergo the mental development that the parents have. Under that 16 years it requires for the parent to come to terms with that, the child suffers immensely, and that's what we rather have. But in the worst case, when the child gets thrown out because the parents never came to terms with those instances, something that's very prevalent in the United States, given that conservative, bigoted communities still continue to exist, what we think is more likely is that these children become homeless and ultimately die of malnutrition. Whoa.
Isn't it a little bigoted to suggest that all homosexual kids will have a worse off life in heterosexual households?
We put to you that the reason why we think gay people are somewhat better is firstly because they at least empathize towards the situation that other gay individuals feel. They are less likely to have any sort of direct hatred towards their children based on a pure concept of sexuality. In principle, however, we are ready to accept that any ideological sound couple will be able to raise that couple up. But given that this debate calls us to talk about gay couples specifically, we can also add that gay couples tend to be more responsible, right? Because the likelihood of them having to have unwanted children when they grow up, unwanted children in the future, and being unable to support their existing children gets much less reduced. At the point in time, they don't have to. They are able to practice safer sex, and their safe sex doesn't lead to new pregnancies and new children. So moving on to my second point, why do we think this maximizes social welfare? We think two reasons. Firstly, it relieves potential pressure on an overstretched foster care system. No thank you. We think that we need to recognize that under the status quo, there is a huge amount of pressure given on state services to adopt children or to take care of children that have already been have abusive parents or parents who have left home. What we don't want to accept is to add onto this problem by envisioning a world in which people are more likely to get thrown out of the house by basis of homosexuality. At the point in which you are a rowdy kid who no longer likes your parents, the likelihood that you're able to conform to the social welfare service at the point in time the state needs to take you in when you are like 12 years old gets marginally higher, it becomes more prohibitively expensive. We rather have these children committed to a new set of parents right now, where they are able to have a fresh start, where the possibility that they will hate their new foster parents are much less reduced because they never knew what these parents were in the first place and they were growing up to begin with. Under that instance, we put to you that we are saving huge costs on society, even conceding to a limited degree that perhaps we are alleviating the spending or the financial situation of your bigoted parents who refuse to take that child in. In the future, it means less money that the state has to spend rehabilitating these children and going after their parents. But also, we put to you that the counterfactual in this particular debate is that if this technology can detect your sexuality at birth, it also means that these bigoted parents are the ones who are able to sell off their children to the black market or abort the kid. We think those are very, very nasty outcomes and very nasty counterfactuals. We would rather, instead of selling the kids off to the black market, that the state took them in. That's the kind of counterfactual that opposition needs to defend. We're proud to propose.
it mean to have a better life? Does it mean to have the richest parents? Does it mean to have the whitest parents? Will they likely give you even more privilege? We think that these standards are not objective at all. And under the same guise, we do not objectively say that homosexual parents are better parents for a homosexual child. We think that it's actually bigoted to suggest that heterosexual parents cannot love and care for a child on an equal platform as a homosexual parent can. So before I go into my substantive material, where I have three main contentions for you, I'll organize my rebuttals as such. I have two main rebuttals on this idea that money correlates to abuse. This first rebuttal simply doesn't make sense. This accusation suggested that if a parent were to give up money, the sort of parent that would give up money to essentially sell their child away to a homosexual family is more likely to abuse that child in the future. We think that this is not true because if you understand the psyche of the sort of person that would be driven to do this, this suggests that they're of a lower socioeconomic level. This means that these types of people are likely working 3 jobs, have a small house, perhaps have many kids. You cannot objectively say that these people are more likely to beat their kids. That is an assumptive and a highly offensive statement to suggest that poor people are likely to beat their kids, because that is not true at all. The second contention is this idea of social welfare. This is a great ambiguous term that really doesn't mean very much because it was largely unsubstantiated. Have a seat. It's strangely tied to hating parents. What this meant was that the manifestation of childhood angst would increase. Let me try to explain to you what it is like to be a person growing up gay. So obviously you have a social backlash when you go to school. You're identified as different. Obviously you don't want your parents being another force as another problem in your life. We think that hating your foster parents is something that might or might not happen. We cannot objectively say that gay people are better people or worse people, or people just come on a whole spectrum of things. The scale of hating your foster parents more or less because they're gay or not really does not make any sense. If they were sold to a heterosexual heteronormative family, they would have the same response entirely. We think that the difference here is that there is no difference between a heterosexual and a homosexual parent in relating to that child. So now to my substantive material. The first is why sexuality is not a determinant of treatment. I already suggested that it is bigoted to say that a heterosexual couple is incapable of genuinely loving, caring, and properly raising a homosexual child. Yes.
Closing document tells you that if you pay these lower socioeconomic people money for their child, you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Because you can educate the lower socioeconomic structures and you can save this homosexual child from abuse.
Your same argument suggests that you would strip all poor children from their family and the prospect of them leading a better life. I already said that a better life is completely subjective, and perhaps they find more meaning connecting to their parents, engaging in hardship, because when they move forward from that into adulthood, they can then appreciate the things that they have come to experience in their earlier lives. We think that value is completely subjective. The example is akin to preventing Caucasian parents from adopting Asian kids on the basis of difference. If that is what your contention is because there's a difference between the values of a homosexual child versus a heterosexual parent, we think that they can still connect on a very meaningful and personal level. My sister and I are completely opposite people, and yet we're still sisters in the same household. With the same experiences, we're completely different people. Likewise, I think that a heterosexual person can connect on a very deep level with their homosexual child. We think that the difference here is negligible. So we can safely assume that heterosexual parents can make fantastic parents. The second is how coercive of a decision this is. We think that a Hobson's choice actually exists here, because living with a financial burden is a significant hardship, and that's why people often take risky jobs that jeopardize their own lives, like fixing underwater oil pipes in order for them to make a higher income. This doesn't make them bad people to trade off their own health for financial comfort. On those same grounds, asking a family to give up their child for money is a genuinely difficult decision, even if they do in fact love that child. Have a seat, because perhaps that same love buys into the bigotry that you then suggest. These poor people that might or might not sell their kids off are thinking, maybe the gay couple that will adopt of my son are richer than me. Maybe they're better than me. Maybe they'll make better parents than I will be. We think that these sorts of stereotypes are completely false. I think that being a poorer, heteronormative parent structure can be equally as successful and meaningful as someone that is rich and homosexual. We think that when you foster these ideas, poor families get ingrained to the fact that they're inferior parents, and that makes it even more harmful, especially when they genuinely love that child. So that increases the guilt of being socioeconomically inferior. Yes?
Do you think there are ever legitimate reasons for parents to give up their kids for adoption?
We think that if they're in poverty, then perhaps when abject poverty makes it such that their child can no longer attend school and can no longer attend basic needs, we think that that line is drawn then. But in any other circumstances, except if they're incredibly abusive, then obviously we'd remove them. We think that the law would protect homosexual sons or daughters from being beaten anyway, so that is sort of a fiat on both sides. My third contention is why our policy leads to more advocacy for the LGBTQIA. The LGBTQIA gains most traction by the strength of their allies. Let me bring to you the example of the hashtag #HeForShe campaign, where men advocated for feminism. This actually helped to disseminate feminist ideals, because what had been seen as an ally and formerly a contradiction to feminism actually came out in support of them. Likewise, I believe that the heterosexual parents can then advocate for their homosexual children, can then say, we actually connect, we have so much in common, even though our backgrounds are very, very different. This is still my child, and this is still the child that I love, even though I may be straight, even though I might be a Catholic, I still love this child. We think that the strength of some family bonds can be really important in drawing the greater community in support of LGBT children. We think that we support LGBTs more so than you do, rather than forcing poor people to give up their children, which is a completely abhorrent concept. That speech, I'd like to invite
May I begin? 5 extensions, but before that, some context. This policy is self-selecting. Given that our policy is not mutually exclusive with financial assistance for the needy parents who want to bring up their children, the parents who would still opt to sell their children with this policy are not likely to want to love their kids anyway. These are the parents who, I'm sorry, unfortunately, are likely to go for the health screening when the mom is pregnant, find out the kid is probably going to be gay, and sell the kid to the black market, abort the kid, or abuse the kid. It is not bigoted for us to suggest that probabilistically, the chances of an abusive life are extremely high. And that's the context that we outside Gov are grappling with reality, not their empty assertions where the parents could love the child in the long run without giving us any logical reason why this might conceivably be the case, when we know that these parents, by choosing this system, are already signaling that I'm not that kind of parent. 5 extensions. The first argument is why it's legitimate for us to make decisions based on probability. Second, why gay couples. Third, about poor people taking care of children. Fourth, about the nature of a better life. And fifth, about social movements and recalibrating activism. No. First argument on probability. It's not going to be radical for me to say that child services already judges the suitability of couples to be parents based on probability of earning power, of social environments of the community. So we don't think it's awful for us to place a probabilistic judgment that a guy's life or a child's life is going to be probabilistically better with certain family structures. In fact, we argue that in the counterfactual, on the converse burden on their side, the only way for ought to be certain that the kid will have a good life is to wait out and see what actually happens in reality. But by that time, it's already reactive. The kid will be 16 or 17 years old, and if all goes well, will be loved by the parents. Great. But culinary communities are likely to come with a lot of angst. But in the worst case, the kid likely to be abused or gay. So we don't stand for a world in which children become social battering rams for us to figure out whether or not the parents is probabilistically going to bring them up well or not. A stage in time saves time, and if we have to make assumptions about the way the kid's likely to be treated, we're happy to do so in his or her best interest. Second extension, that on this quibble, why are we saying that only gay couples bring up children well? Okay, I'm sorry to have to clarify this, but this model is not mutually exclusive with heterosexual couples who want to participate in this scheme by saying, hey, include me in the pool. This can be open to them as well. We're happy to open it to them. We are saying, however, that probabilistically, gay parents are likely to be good homes for gay children because, by definition, gay people can't have unwanted children. I mean, yeah. And not only that, there's a self-selecting environment. Like for gay kids who are growing up in Singapore who feel that they've got no role models, it's often a stroke of luck if your parents are also gay or also lesbian, because from the very get-go, you have role models from the time that you're being nursed or suckled in your mother's breast or in the quad. So we do think probabilistically, we're happy to open this to more couples if we need to, but we're happy to stand and defend that gay couples are usually the best matches for these children who are already unwanted by society. We're happy to defend that in general. Now, the third thing that we want to extend and talk about, which also rebuts Sonia's argument, is that for some reason, our policy suggests that poor people cannot take care of children. Well, let's just be frank. Number one, we've already said that our policy is not mutually inclusive with larger social welfare movements. Clearly, this will probably already go on. We are happy to pay poor parents who want to keep their children additional money to keep them in school or subsidized housing, priority in housing queues, etc. We're okay with that. We are not suggesting that poor people make worse parents. However, we do think, as Colin pointed out in the POI, that sometimes parents do want to give their children up for adoption because they personally feel that given my circumstances and because the environment of my community is so hostile towards a gay kid, I will not be able to provide for a good life. In fact, in Penang itself, where we stand, a lot of families are constructed because Chinese women give up their children for adoption thinking, I want to raise you but I can't, so I'll give you someone who can do it a lot better than myself. In fact, at 5 minutes and 47 seconds in her speech, Sonia conceded that in her speech when she said that there is often a line drawn when parents feel that they really cannot provide for their children. So even Ock admits that there actually is some point where the parents can decide legitimately to give their children up for finances. What we on our side are happy to facilitate is that if the government is the one paying the parent, then we're cutting out an expensive middleman where the counterfactual is these parents will try to sell the kid on the open market to some kind of black, like smuggler from elsewhere, where a lot of the money is not checked or not properly regulated. So we think if the parent has to sell the child off, it's best to do so within a transparent government framework that can offer counseling to the parent. Yes?
If a conservative parent refuses to sell their child, don't you condemn that child to a worse life when you openly out him to a family that is definitely going to abuse him?
Well, the thing is, in this world where the technology already exists to screen your baby, he'll be outed whether we like it or not. So the idea is, given that this presumably works like an ultrasound scan where you can, gay, or lesbian, then in that particular instance, we think out him, it's a foregone conclusion. But give him a better life, that's something we'd like to aspire for. Okay, now, fourth extension, that on a better life and how Sonia claims that is subjective. Let's be frank. A life has subjective and objective metrics both. Because in this particular case, the objective metric that we want to talk about is the likelihood that you will, not be abused, that you'll be kept in your house and not thrown out on the streets. So we do think that it's legitimate for us as the government to assume, especially when these kids are being given up for adoption, that certain objective metrics of life, like having a loving family who accepts you, are things we should pursue. In fact, we don't disagree that there could be subjective expressions of life like, love, family relationships, and we are very happy to stand by that. But oftentimes for gay kids in this kind of situation, subjective experiences of life are often built on objective metrics of well-being. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I'm in my house enjoying my objective standards of life, then I'm often able to enjoy the subjective ties and relationships which come with that. So if we need to prioritize, we are happy to put this first as a bedrock so we can enjoy the love with a new family later on. Last argument, extension on that of social movements, this deals with Sonia's last argument. Because we are very happy with Madam Speaker to look, Sonia argues that these parents can advocate for their gay children. Given that these parents are those who will sell them off, that's not likely in this context. But what we're happy to say is that this policy allows the LGBTQIA movement to recalibrate families. Why? Because right now, the narrative of family is that of heteronormative birth lottery. What we do on our side is to recalibrate families based on love and choice. That I chose to take you into my home when people gave you up. That we are constructing families in this situation based on a system where these poor children who have nowhere else to go can be taken with people who choose to love them. Another point that the social narrative message that we sent out is that it's possible for people to choose their family, to reverse the vagaries of the birth lottery, and to go to the family that we want. This is how the LGBTQIA movement is a lot better to recalibrate the notion of family ties in a way which is more suited towards individual dignity and determinism. And they also didn't deal with Colin's last argument on the long run harms, because eventually at some point you're kicking the can down the road. These kids will just end up in the social welfare system anyway, where costs are going to go out of control and where they've already suffered 16 years of endured abuse. We acknowledge we may be being presumptuous in the short run, but these are children's lives we are talking about. And for this government stands proudly to say that no cost is too high if you're going to protect these children from a worse fate.
That speech, I like every girl.
The reason why the world operates on a metric that is reactive and not presumptive is because probabilities are false. Just because you are more likely to do something, it does not automatically mean that we have to make a policy that excludes you from things that you're more likely to do based on your race, sexuality, gender, and so on. And we don't think the proposition from side OG is valid. I'm going to do a few things in my speech. First, I'll respond to the arguments provided by opening government, and then proceed to tell you why the life of this homosexual kid who did not have homosexual parents will be far off inside government's world. But let's look at rebuttals. First, as like a short rebuttal to CG's POI, right? Poor people should not have children because being poor is in and of itself meaning that you will have a crappy life. We disagree. We think that it's a horrible notion to assume that in a vast majority of circumstances, people who are poorer are just means that you're less likely to achieve the benefits of life. Just because you assume that the benefits of life are capitalistic, luxuries, goods that can be purchased by money, but not other things. And we think that those other things are equally as valuable. Stuff like familial relationships, stuff like living in a biological family where you feel at home because that mother is the one that gave birth to you. Things like that are also things that we defend, and you take it away because you put an objective standard to what happiness is, and that standard is flawed. Second, please have a seat. The current way in which we adjudicate who is a good parent is not mutually exclusive to how adoption centers decide who is a parent. Great. We think those metrics are also flawed. The metrics that adoption centers use to adjudicate who is a good parent, who is a bad parent. Right? We'll shut them down as well because we don't feel wealth is in any way a determinant to how much love you can give a child, how much acceptance you can give to that child's sexuality in and of itself, because wealth in and of itself is a privilege and not something you work for in a vast majority of circumstances. But the second question that we have to ask is why living in a gay household means that you are more likely to live a happier life. You are the likelihood is immaterial. It's possible for you to live in a straight family and live happier lives anyway. So that means OG is also okay with it. Racially profiling like black people because black people are more likely to commit crimes. Or the question that we have to ask you is, if it is so horrible to live in a straight household, why don't you just forcefully take out all children without paying them anyway, because that is an a priori good under your side, and give to all gay heterosexual parents to take care of. You don't understand why. But the next contention, have a seat, that people or parents give their children up to adoption centers, and therefore they give it up willingly, so it's okay, because current status quo, parents give it up willingly. Here's the difference. When they give up their children because they maybe can't take care of their children, or they feel that the community isn't suitable for their children, money isn't a factor as to whether or not they give that child up. The biggest concern is the well-being of that child, the love that the child faces when they willingly go up to adoption center and say, I can't take care of you, I don't gain any best interest in this, it's all in the best interest of the child. But when money is important, and this is a hugely coercive choice, when parents have no choice because you have to survive in this world that does not cater for the poor, because poor people just aren't taken care of as well, that's the difference between a willing and not willing child. But every example was that, the child will be abused, the child will be hated on by heterosexual parents. We do not see a reason as to why it is more likely to happen just because you have a similar sexuality to that. But let's move on, right? I don't think, OG did sufficient to respond to what Sonia had brought to the table. So she first told us that sexuality is in no way a determinant to treatment to how a person would treat another individual, and that's unfair because at the reason as to why we act reactively is because at the point in which a child is abused and we can see evidence suggest that a person is wrong, not because he is straight, white or black or male, because that person is a horrible human being to that child, then we take the child away from the parent. We don't think sexuality or any other personal characteristic of yourself is harmful. Have a seat. But why is this decision coercive? Because the contention that we heard was that if parents already are considering money, they don't love you as much as they possibly could, and therefore they don't love them and we take them away anyway. Here's the difference. It's not easy to simply say no to large sums of money that could help you out of poverty, because you may be able to put other children through school that you want to help. You may be able to elevate your status when you're suffering because you don't have enough food, water, access to welfare because the state welfare is already run down and horribly maintained, right? These kinds of decisions may be sometimes selfish, but parents just are pushed into a situation where they cannot choose in those circumstances. To which, have a seat, in a vast majority of circumstances, people regret giving up their children for money. People regret selling their kids off because they realize that although it was a coercive decision, they just do not want to give away the familiar relationship to them. Before that, you have your eye.
What's wrong with a mom selling off one of her 6 children to have a better life in a richer family so that she can provide better for the other 5, so that all 6 children grow up peacefully, happily, and well adjusted?
Yes, but the reason as to why the mom is giving up the child is not because she wants the child to be in a better position, but because she wants the money in and of itself. This means poor people don't have a choice in these circumstances. That's the core problem with this model of side government. Why my argument? Why the life of a child who does not have homosexual parents, and these are the children who live in the household where heterosexual parents are probably wealthy enough to say no to government's model. Why would it be worse for them? We must accept there will definitely be a portion of society that will act in this way. So people who are rich, people who live in the higher bracket of the middle income, who have a capacity to say no and aren't really dependent on cash because they have enough of a privilege to live without it. What is the harm for these individuals? You make it a narrative to suggest that life with a homosexual parent is a privilege that a gay kid must have in order to obtain the most amount of benefits that a gay kid could possibly have. And that is a privilege that everyone should strive for. What happens? For that child that wanted to live in a household with heterosexual parents, where heterosexual parents genuinely just love the child for who the child is, and no amount of money could take the child away from them, it makes it harder for them to live. Because when he goes to school, he will get bullied because he's not the actual gay child, because he lives in a straight household. Because other gay children have gay parents and they live better lives, so be discriminated as a result of that. But second, he is more likely to hate his parents who are willing to just push away money for loving the child, and this disrupts all the familiar relationships that you wanted to have in opening government. So what is the harm to this? It is harder on top of that to be a gay person in this world because of how horrible we are to them, but it's even worse because he is the worst version of a gay child, and the discrimination is amplified because other gay children has privileges and they are better than them. But second, he's more likely to suffer amplified versions of what they already feel. But second harm, they feel the need to want to reconnect with their parents, and this is a horrible thing because in a world where the relationship has already been secured and built for years and years and years, and you tell them that you actually had a parent that was separated from you because your heterosexual parents couldn't afford to take care of you, at that point they feel the need to reconnect with this individual. The harm to this is that you interrupt already existing familial ties, and this happens all the time when parents tell the children that they are adopted and they seek the need to find their original parents. It makes their lives worse, it makes the life of those biological parents worse, and the relationship that is currently existing between the adoptive parent and the child itself. We oppose. But you're sick, right?
Speech, not like somebody.
Step by step. What's the last 2 things Roshan said? Number 1, you hate your parents. Number 2, you'd seek and find them, and that's problematic. Roshan, that's an argument against adoption in general. So if your problem is there, those are your problems, then you should be against adoption. Force all parents to keep all children, let them abuse each other. It's okay, kumbaya, right? No, in the status quo, it already happens. There are kids who go meet their parents, who put them up for adoption. There are kids who hate their parents. That is not a harm. If there is a harm, you should have made a better policy to tackle that. Secondly, what is his main characterization? It is a Hobson's choice for these parents. No, it is not. Just because they're poor doesn't mean they're irrational. That doesn't mean they cannot consent to make choices that they seem fit, right? So Roshan's main argumentation is these poor people are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Correct, we concede. But just because when they make this particular decision, he never argued to us why the decision that they make is always an a priori back. We think, if anything, it is a good thing that we give them alternative options to in which they can continue their life, right? So what did we aim to bring to you today? We tell you that the nuance in this debate is about intersectionality, about being poor and also being gay, and the community and the geography that you will be living in and why that is so problematic. So the main rebuttal to this is we don't think it's an option choice, we think it's a legitimate choice if parents want to give up their children. Because if you think it's always a problem when parents give up their children, then that is an argument for giving up their children in general, right? Like we told you, lots of parents already give up a child or children in general to gain economic benefits. I mean, to be able to save up more money and give other children more benefits, right? It's not unheard of. So we think your problem in general is people giving up their children, never nuancing it to why gay children and gay parents are the problem. Lastly, he said that no, sit down. This is his other argument. He said that no, heterosexual parents can love their child. We're not engaging with this. We think heterosexual people can love their child, that's not a problem. But a heterosexual parent that is willing to give the child up for money obviously values money at a higher price than raising that particular homosexual child. So there could be two incentive structures to be given to this particular parent. So this parent makes this choice. Obviously he feels that he's making the right choice, right? Because maybe he feels this. It doesn't have to be bad reasons. Maybe he feels that there are good reasons. I'm not ready to take care of a homosexual child. I can't cater for this particular child. I don't know how to raise homosexual children, right? So if there are good reasons to why these parents might want to give up their children, you never engage with that. Lastly, he said wealth isn't important. Let me laugh at your face. That is not true, right? Number one, how are you going to buy milk, flour, rice, which are basic necessities, if you're not having any form of wealth? Or even if that, let's extend this, right? There are certain requirements, there are certain thresholds when people adopt children. We think that this needs to be in place to protect these children, because forcing them into poor families is not, there is no net benefit in that. But there is huge extravagant harm when you live in intersectional, when you are an intersectional individual. So ladies and gentlemen, where would we be extending this debate? What did Lucas bring to you, or Lucas and Colin together, right? Number one, they say that gay parents are more likely to be better parents for his gay children. We will extend by telling you why and how. Secondly, they said that and I think the second nuance that we will bring to this debate is about intersectionality. What happens when you're gay and poor within the rural area? Which brings me to my first question. How will the homosexual kids benefit from this policy? The premise is there is a chance of a better life. So we think that in any option, you should always try to go for the better life, right? Sit down. So it's problematic if you're poor and gay because you're more likely to be severely abused, not just by parents, but the individuals around the community, the geographical location. Why? Because more likely if you're in a poor area, there's lack of liberal education, there's lack of understanding on what LGBTs fight for and what they go through on a day-to-day basis, right? Like for example in India, you see a lot of trans individuals being molested, raped, and harmed within their own communities because they are transsexuals. And we think it is especially pernicious in poor communities because there's lack of a political will to go in and solve that problem. Number two, they don't know the structures on the outside that can particularly help them because they are always in this small bubble. So homophobia is extremely prevalent in rural areas due to the lacking of this education. So we can easily draw a nexus that this child is more likely to be abused, if not by the parents, by his friends, right? They'll call him gay. They will not let him on the football team. The teachers will, the word will spread, and even the teachers could probably oppress him. In comparison, what's the comparative? if he's brought up in a gay community by gay parents, what is the gay parents' best interest? They would know the kind of places that this gay kid would want to go to. They would have friends and kids of friends who are gay friendly, right? So this allows a better development for this particular child, which is important that we hope that CO can engage with us. Secondly, in comparative on your side, he will always be viewed as an outsider. And since he's economically disenfranchised, he will always feel that he's been kicked down twice. And that's the nuance of intersectionality. Let me tell you that black and poor women face so much more harm than just black and just poor women, right? And we think that those harms are too big of a deal for us not to say it's a problem. So our solution directly tackles this problem and reduces this community that is severely harmed. Sit down. So this brings me to my question. Why are homosexual parents better in general? This was slightly touched on by Colin Lucas, but I'll extend this, right? Number one, usually in most countries, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, so all of you have been arguing that having homosexual parents is an a priori good. So if that's so true, then why don't you just force straight parents to just give them up?
No one is forcing anyone. It's not an a priori good. It's only an a priori good if the parent wants to give up his kid for a huge sum of money, right? If the parent wants to keep the kid, that is not a problem. This debate is about this particular thought process that goes through this parent. I don't value my kid as much as I value money. This homosexual person doesn't value his money as much as he values children, right? Why can't you just make the trade-off? You give the homosexual person a child, you give the heterosexual person money, they both get what they want. What is your problem then? Alright? Second extension, right? Who this policy mainly affect, right? Is that there is a nuance and there is a benefit. What are they telling you? Homosexual parents are better. Why so, right? Because they've gone through these experiences, they've been bullied before, and there is a sense of trust, right? Like most bigot parents don't talk to their gay children because they don't think they can resonate with them and solve the problems they're going through. Because the problems that each individuals are going through are severely different. So we think because of the experiences gay parents have, they're more likely and better equipped to help the children go through the phases of life. But this is my second extension, and how it really does improve the LGBT community in general. When you become a parent as a homosexual, the problem in status quo now is most adoptive agencies don't want to give their kids to you out of the fear that you will make them gay, or because most adoptive agencies are religious to begin with. But when you become a parent and when you have a child, the net benefit is that you would now have to subscribe to structures with other children and other parents, right? Like going to school, going to parent-teacher meetings, going for tuition classes, going and picking them up. So you're more prevalent among more parents, and when other parents see that gay people can actually take care of children, and sometimes can even take care of children better than them, this reduces the stigma that gay people are bad parents. And we think that that is a good that only we can fight for. Supremely proud to propose.
It's so hot now. Are you okay, right?
It's difficult enough explaining to homophobes that interaction with homosexuals may not be that horrible. Here's the thing though, the government makes that explanation, right, that interaction, a whole lot worse when they enforce through your government subsidy of adoption of homosexual children by homosexual parents mostly. You enforce the idea that it's really best off if we segregate our community as a whole. But the best thing is though, that now this is under the guise of helping the homosexual community because they're always better off when they're together. That's horrible for the vast majority of homosexual people, right? But before I move on to my two extensions as to why, first of all, the upbringing of that said homosexual child will be harmed no matter how loving your homosexual parents try to be. And second, why this enforces the divide between LGBTs and heterosexuals within the movement even, I'll talk about 2 points of rebuttal. The first, would parents that are willing to give up their children for money really be so horrible? Apart from the fact that they could be poor, let's think about the social signaling that such a policy from government accrues, right? No thank you. Because we think, right, that paying money for specifically to make sure that homosexual children always stay with homosexual parents is a they value judgment that the government places on them, right? So this means even if you are a very loving heterosexual couple that wants to take care of your child, you're likely going to be living in a community that will tell you, but didn't you hear what the government said? You're not going to be as good a parent as the others, right? Because you don't understand their struggle. You aren't homosexual. You don't have homosexual friends that you can make friends, that you can show to your other kids, right? In that sense, then we think they are disenfranchising not just poor heterosexual couples, right? But couples that just want what's best for their child, and you here tell them that what's best is for you to give up your child for a homosexual couple, right? The worst thing though is that they say, if it's true though that here's where they be like, oh, abuse is really bad and we can't fix it in the long term. If it's true though that abuse is so horrible and you have enough money, as they say, to buy babies, right? We think you probably have enough money also to fund social security, right? Later on, social services, or fund homes for these kids that are thrown out. We would much rather in our world that it would be expensive later on to help them, because at least we get the benefits, right, of being able to have these children interact with your heterosexual individuals and possibly get a better life as a result of that. No, thank you. The last one though is empathy means that they're a better role model and you get more acceptance and such. No, we think a better parent is one that's more financially capable of taking care of you. No, thank you. More importantly though, we think a better parent is a parent that is able to be accepted by society, right? That is not having eggs thrown at their home because they're the gay couple on the block. Therefore, we think you only get to have a role model in your parent if your parent is being treated well by society, and that's not necessarily true, because obviously they understand that homophobia is very real, very dangerous. But let's talk about my extension. The first, the upbringing of a homosexual child, by both homosexual parents and then heterosexual parents in our world, right? So let's talk about the best case scenario. Your homosexual parents are loving, they do everything they can to make that child's life great. Two things though. The first one is that we think the child is likely to feel rejected by the heterosexual community, right? Because what they're going to think is, when I grow up, in my homosexual homosexual family, right, all they're going to know is there was a heterosexual mom who gave birth to me, went through that pain of labor, but I still wasn't enough. I had to be bought away from her because she just could not love me enough, right? We think that these kinds of things are likely to foster an antagonistic sort of mentality where it's me versus you, right? Because they hated me, they gave me away to a homosexual parent, right? And this is even worse, right? If there's a homosexual parent or homosexual family may not even be that great of parents, right? There's always going to be like friction between your parents, no matter how much they can identify with your struggle. The conclusion to this rejection argument though is that integration is that much harder if you put them in a position where they feel as if they'll never be able to mix with your heterosexual people because they have rejected me. Before I move on to why they are statistically worse off though, yes.
The counterfactual is, I was a gay kid and to live with people who beat me, who hate me every moment of my life. I actually hate them now. How's that any better for integration?
Okay, so if you have parents that are willing to give their children away for money, that means you also have money for your social services that will fine you if you beat your child, right? Stop trying to make us like defend illegal things, right? We'll do everything we can for your social services, right? Alright. But the second thing though, why they're statistically worse off? Now this is where part of the debate was missing, right? Because the unfortunate truth about homosexual individuals is that they deal with a lot of discrimination, a lot of a lack of opportunities, because many people deem their lifestyle to be horrible, right? So what's the problem with that? It means that many of them are not financially stable. Often they aren't given the same opportunities in jobs and whatnot, right? So what is the harm of that? This means that you are statistically more likely then to be giving this child from the hands of a privileged heterosexual couple that may be a lot more well off than they are, into the hands of a homosexual couple that may not be as such, right? So that means that the only thing that you provide for is the gay facet of their identity. But remember that every child has much more than their sexuality going for them, right? Some of them want to go to university. Some of them want to simply be able to live in a big house, right? Because maybe they're materialistic as opposed to simply hypersexual, right? If you take away all those other facets of identity, which are much bigger than just the one facet that is homosexuality, right? We think that you've done this child an immense harm. But the worst thing though, if you think about the lives of these homosexual people, even if they're very well off and there's no such thing as being poor, right? We think that homophobia is still a harsh reality, which means that your whole family is likely to get targeted, right? Because when they see a homosexual family with homosexual children, then often will attend your homosexual LGBT rallies, right? Because that's what they're probably going to be like. They're going to want to fight for their rights. We think this means that the child is brought up as an LGBT disadvantage because it means that they're going to have to be forced to do things like attend your rally, which may be harmful to them, right? Because maybe you're going to go there and instead of like, and maybe you get discriminated if you go out in the street waving the pride flag, right? Because people are very, very homophobic. Ultimately, we think it's bad for this homosexual child to live with them. But lastly though, let's talk about why this enforces a divide between LGBTs and heterosexual individuals, right? Because we think that while there's already a lot of political support for segregation, understand that like it's seen as a disease still, right? So now if the state, under the guise of helping them, sets a value judgment on homosexuality and heterosexuality, never being able to sit next to each other, right? We think that there's going to be a whole lot less support for integration of those, thank you so much, of those individuals, right? Because they're going to say, those homophobic people that don't want to sit with your child, they're going to say, this is for your own good. Segregation is ultimately harmful for you because I'm poisonous to you, right? We think that means you're less likely to have homosexual individuals who are able to like integrate on an equal playing field with heterosexuals, because now they're seen just as simply divided. In conclusion, you need to think about the long term. Even in our worst case scenario, if this child is brought up badly, right, we think at least there is some kind of opportunity for them to mix with the people that are around them, to mix with other heterosexuals, and maybe there's some long-term change that can be brought forth. They only talked about the short-term go with us. Okay.
Yeah.
When we set the cap or the drinking limit for breathalyzers, we accept that some people who have the limit may still be good drivers, but we ban them from driving anyways. Why? Because as Lucas told you, the scale of harm must be balanced with the probability that certain harms will occur. But closing government took this one step further when we told you that not only is it a game about probabilities, but this is not only a game about short-term abuse, it is a game about the long-term narrative and the way in which we see homosexual families. I'm going to go through this debate house by house and tell you why we beat each of them out. I'm going to begin with opening government. The end point that opening government had throughout this debate was we must help the children and these children must be protected. They proved this by then showing us about the most extreme possible scenarios that probably exist within a narrow part of the spectrum. Things like selling your child off to the black market or killing your child after they are born. Then they said, we save money by the state. We talked about the more important arguments because while they minimized the harm by showing probability, they were less effective in proving the value add that government can truly bring. And that's why we brought you 3 unique things. First, on how we better minimize the harms. Lucas's second extension on why gay parents are better was nothing more than just a tagline because he never proved to you the logic for why gay parents are actually going to provide better support structures. This was only crystallized in Mithu's speech when he told you 3 things. First, that these individuals can then develop a connection with their parents because they build the confidence and the parent can instill a confidence having gone through the exact same things. Second, that these parents know what kind of problems to look out for because homosexual parents have been through it before, so they can prevent these children from ever even being bullied and things like that in the first place. But thirdly, that these children can develop a level of trust with their parents. Yeah. Homosexual children who are born with in heterosexual families, even if the heterosexual families are so loving, are always growing up with a sense of distrust, a sense of uncertainty as to how their parents would react. To this extent, they would be much more confident to deal with this on our side. Therefore, we not only reduce the harm of suffering, but we also provide the added benefit of allowing these children to actualize a better relationship with their parents, something uniquely proven by closing government. But secondly, we told you that we reform these bigots better as well, right? When poor individuals who can't afford enough money, like all sides in this debate generally agree, like the people who would be accepting this money are mostly poor people, right? So when they can't accept this money and we give them this money, we give them the opportunity to then get educated, right? Why do we think that was so important? Because at the point at which education is one of the direct reasons why these families are so non-progressive and unliberal in the first place. We think that by providing them this money, we provide them an avenue through which they can then achieve this open mindset that their children can achieve it that they don't have right now. This is the long-term reformation that no side in this debate dealt with yet. Yes?
Apparently, good parenting means that you are akin to your
always, right? But we think at the point at which one specific identity is being oppressed and discriminated to such an extent, then we would support that policy. And it's too late for you to prove why that principal point matters anyways. Third point, on poor families and the majority of people who will accept. Here's what we brought to you uniquely. Why it is worse for these gay children to be brought up in poor families. This was unique because we drew the nexus between how the socio-economic factors inherently worsen the suffering of gay individuals. 5 reasons. First, and this happens even if the poor parent loves the child, right? So even if they're talking about parents who love their child having to give their child up. 4 reasons. No, sit down. First, because the progressiveness is tied with education levels. At the point at which the parent is more poor, there is a much higher probability that they're going to be less progressive, largely because they aren't influenced in an urban setting, maybe a more rural setting. But second, because these children lack access to online support structures. For homosexual individuals, oftentimes online support structures, when you don't have the kind of friends in real life, are something that really helps these individuals gain ties and gain access and gain advice, and often helps prevent or mitigate the harms of mental illness. But thirdly, we argue that access to support structures in real life are less on their side when you have poor parents, right? Why? Because these poor parents tend to force their children into closets, and these children are then scared to get out of closet. This means that you are less likely to meet other homosexual individuals in real life as well, because everybody is in a goddamn closet. This then means that you feel like you are the only person in the world that is alone. This leads to the terrible mental harms that we told you from member of government that extremely take the lives of these children. Why was this more important than the material OG brought you? Because OG only wanted to talk about the direct physical harms. The mental harms, however, on homosexual people are much more common because they happen more regularly, and therefore these harms occur these physical harms manifest as well. But I'm going to now talk to you about opening opposition, because they were largely a very naive team. I won't be taking any more. Because we argue, they said not all heterosexual couples are bad. And Lucas already talked about probability, right? But we gave you logic in Mitran's speech when we told you that oftentimes parents don't unconditionally love their children right off the bat, right? Oftentimes parents love their children based on the characteristics they know about these children. So rebuttal-wise, at the point at which, say for example, some parents don't really love a child because they find out that their lover cheated on them and then had that child. We argue similarly, extremely religious parents or bigoted parents would look at that child as like Satan's child, for example, and they have these religious or like twisted conceptions about this child. So we don't think they would love this child in the first place. But then they said, oh, why don't you just take all children of poor people away? No, thank you. That's not true. As Mitran brought you exclusively, he told you that we only take children away at the point at which their rights are violated. What does this mean? That at the point in which the right to expressing yourself as a homosexual individual is then violated by opposition bench, when they give you a higher probability of being put into a family that doesn't accept you, we argue that right is then gone. Then they said, we'll help the LGBT movement. We would posit, and like this crazy extension from DLO where he says you're going to be bullied by other gay people for not really being gay. We just don't think that's true, because we think the LGBT movement functions off a level of solidarity, and we think that's extremely important, and we don't think that their side breaks that entirely. Closing opposition brought to you uniquely only one thing, that these children will be rejected by the heterosexual community and creates an us versus them mentality. The issue on their side is that their extension was extremely simplistic. We would say that heterosexual people will not just start hating on children, because obviously these children never chose to be put into a homosexual household in the first place. But we would say that even if they do feel antagonized by the fact that the money is being taken away or the children is being taken away, we say that the kind of people who would be antagonized are the very kind of people who would be antagonized anyways, or the people who are divided against homosexuals anyways. Then they told us about rich heterosexuals being sent to poor homosexuals, and we don't think that really matters in this debate, because as opening opposition and all other group houses agree, that this debate lies centrally around poor people accepting them because they need money. For all those reasons, we are proud to oppose. Propose.
Thank you. I'd like to invite
By forcing a child into an objectively poorer, victimized and disenfranchised family to embrace the socially constructed notion of love, we say that you limit his or her choices and you choose his or her identity because they are not able to have the agency and the most amount of opportunity to be the person that they want to be. We are going to punish team closing government because we brought to you 3 unique extensions, but they wanted to shaft or they wanted to rebut their own bench. The first extension we gave you, why it's less likely to integrate. We say that when there's stigma placed onto these children, that they can only be loved if they are born. So here's also responding to your 1-second rebuttal. If your parents chose to sell you, this means they chose to give you up because they could not love you or they did not want to love you. So in your world, that is one more reason for us to discriminate this gay child. That is one more reason for this gay child to hate himself. But the second extension, why we deny opportunity. We say that you as the LGBT community may never win this fight. And if you choose to fight it, it will take a long time. That's why we'd rather you born into a privileged family that has the most amount of connections to richer people that won't be discriminated because you're homosexual. Because when this happens, no thank you. We think this is then they can have the most opportunity to find other parts of their life they want to embrace. If they are more economically empowered, they can opt out of the system and go into a better community. If they have more connections and more friends, maybe this is a better discussion that could have happened there. But when they're part of a homosexual community, the discrimination is that much more worse because you're also tied to your family. And that means you won't have the same social circles, you won't have the same opportunities. No, thank you. But finally, that you empower segregation. If the stigma is true and that these people can only be loved if they are born and we don't have to care about them, you empower the notion that both can never coexist because a heterosexual man should never think about what a homosexual guy wants and how that can align with this. When a parent is forced to see how his child sees the world, that's when the parent is likely to change because it's the person that he cares about the most. Now, dealing with the debate, there are 3 issues, 3 questions that need to be asked. The first question, and remember, these extensions never responded, so they still stand. The first extension deal with these guys. Are these parents the best match? No, the first one. Is there a chance of a better life? Because their bigger idea was that it's going to be no education because the debate happens in India, where all the poor people live in an extremely conservative society. So in your side, you have to be hardline. You would mandate all poor people to give up their children, or not the poor people are going to live an awful life. And if you can do that, we say we can mandate all rich people to pay that much more taxes so we can have better schools. So there's no debate. But your gay parents will also send their kids to the same schools because you never proved that they were richer or that they are the richest. So in your world, they will still have conservative schools and they would send them there anyways. But when they do, that's one more way to discriminate their gay kid because of the stigma that we talked about before. Here's the comparative. That they go to poor schools and they may get discriminated, but they develop their identity in spite of that harm. And here's where you have a better fight. If a gay person is forced to go through so much more struggle, then the struggle for his LGBT identity is that much more meaningful to him, the community, and everyone else around him. Because he did have to break down these norms, he did have to fight back. This is a person who's going to be that much more dedicated towards fighting the same patriarchy and fighting the same discrimination in the future because he values it and he's done it before. So if your metric is experience, great, he has the most amount of experience. And if some kids suffer, that's alright, because at least we get more kids who are able to fight the fight. But why are gay parents better? This is still their nonsense. So, if the gay parents do not earn the kids, because in your world they're simply having the kids sold to them, the same stigma will exist that you as a gay parent can only have a child if the state literally sells you the child. So you do not disprove the fact this is someone who can earn their kids and treat them as any other individual. You only entrench the fact these people are so alien, they can only have children if we intervene and take away the kids from a poor family and give it to a homosexual family. You never normalize them. You make the stigma that much more worse because you legitimize it. No thank you. Now, are these parents the best match for the child? The second question. No way, because they will never be as rich. We say that if you're brilliant modelists, they're going to be outed from birth, and now everyone is going to know you're homosexual. So all your homosexual couples will be more at the risk of harm, of them being denied jobs because they're gay, of them being not included in social circles because they're gay. Because you forget, a majority of the people that live in this world are religious, and a majority of religions say that homosexuality is a sin. So in your world, your parents are going to be hated. When your parents are discriminated and not included in your social circles, this also affects the way that they can deal with their child. No, thank you. So maybe they might be emotionally good, but the objective harm to the child sways the emotions of that child like hate himself. And here's why. Because of his parents, he would not have had the best life that he could have had. He wouldn't have had the most agency over his life. The comparative is that maybe in your world we dislike our gay identity, but we have so much more access to friends and connections, and maybe being homosexual is good, but that's a social construct. It's objective for you to have opportunity, and that's what we give our children. No, thank you. We can find happiness in other ways, we can do other things. But even in your best case scenario, when you have more love from the parents, we say that that's more hate for the community. Because this is the LGBT community that ruined my life. This is the LGBT community that put me through so much more suffering and made me so much more different than the other kid. What's the distinction? We know that this kid will have the self-outed to his straight parents, but if he tries his best to change and repress his identity, if he tries his best to be the best kind of child for that straight parent, that's preferable, because we'd rather you have the most amount of opportunities than deny yourself all opportunities from birth by virtue of your gender and virtue of your identity. It's okay for you to try not to be gay if that means you can live a better life in the future and you're empowered. I'll take opening.
Okay, if the comparative to your religious parents will signal that they're not ready because they can't love these children, we are okay with some short-term segregation, so these communities can form safe spaces to which to reach out later to have regular integration across both straight and gay communities. What's wrong with that model of integration?
Okay, so wow, giving me a model in your POI really early from you guys, but also we say it doesn't matter. As long as you take away these parents and you make them a commodity, you're still going to have the same stigma that exists from them. If you take them away from richer parents, you're still going to deny opportunity. But the final question, will we be able to protect a child by giving him to a homosexual couple? What if these people love them? And that's what they conceded. If these people do love them, the struggle is that much more meaningful to the LGBT, because now we influence those with power and privilege to join our fight. And within these families, we can influence our other family members also who can relate. If there are any other straight parents out there who also have gay children, they now know that they can love their child and not just sell him out. And that's when we can have better relationships between the very people who control your society and could also control your laws, the straight people. But what if they don't love the child? If they don't love the child, we told you that this gay person should fight. And he still has a meaningful story because he can use the victim's narrative. He can come back out there and be the face of your LGBT community. If anything in your world, the fight is that much more empowered, and we should be willing to risk a few people to achieve that fight. We say that these homosexual people should not be homosexual. If that means they're not going to get opportunity, if that means they're going to be discriminated their entire lives, if that means they're going to have a shit life, and this should be what allows them the most amount of opportunity, what allows them the most amount of happiness, and that's money in today's world, not homosexuality.
Getting better. Thanks.